They say what you don't know can't hurt you. But what if I told you that a man accused of abusing his own children was actually the backbone to the US public school system? Let me say this very plainly. A confirmed British asset, aka British spy, financial criminal, and child abuser is the person who shaped American curriculum for decades. And now his daughter is the only one paying the price for a global human trafficking ring. The Epstein files might actually reveal more than just pedophile politicians. It could reveal the psychological warfare that has been enacted on American citizens, particularly children, for decades. Guys, my name is G. If you have not already, go ahead, subscribe to my channel, and let's get into my notes on the Epstein files. Everybody knows that Trump is in the Epstein files. We know that. Everyone knows that Trump has been inappropriate with underage girls. Everyone knows that he is a convicted felon. Everyone knows he's a rapist. But yet and still, he's president again. So let's be so for real, okay? If Trump is in the Epstein files, what difference would it make? What would that change? This is the same man who campaigned saying that he could shoot somebody and he would not lose any voters. And so far, that seems to be holding true. No matter what this man does, his base will support him. So it doesn't make sense that he is hiding these Epstein files simply because him and his pedophile politician friends are in them. It has to be more than that. So what would it change if we knew every name in that list? What would it change for anybody? Nobody does anything to these men to hold them accountable for their behavior. Biden didn't even release these files for some reason. So maybe we're not asking the right questions. Ghislaine Maxwell is the only person who's being held accountable. She's also being very well protected because of what she knows. And we all assume that what she knows about those files is related to who's on the list, the politicians, the celebrities, the people that don't want to be exposed. But Ghislaine Maxwell's history and her father and the wealth that she's been living off of is what's really far more interesting than what we already know. When Epstein was finally exposed, Ghislaine Maxwell was framed as a twisted socialite who recruited young girls for Epstein's playthings, as well as her own. But we don't talk that much about why she's a socialite and where her wealth came from. Robert Maxwell, the man that I talked about in my introduction, was her father. He was a British asset who became a publisher and actually owned pretty much the majority of all educational materials that were distributed in the United States. Robert Maxwell ran the largest educational publishing empire in America. It became a monopoly under, guess who? Reagan. So in the 1980s, when corporations and corporate ideologies were coming to play more of a role in politics, that is when education and the books, particularly the textbooks that were distributed to most of American students, was owned and operated by one man, Robert Maxwell. McGraw-Hill and Macmillan Books was a conglomerate that distributed all of the educational materials for American students. If you went to school in the United States, it's very likely you remember seeing either McGraw or Macmillan as the publishers of your textbooks from K through 12. So they affected the education from kindergarten, from the beginning, all the way through high school. So this man had direct influence over millions of American students. Let that sink in and then marinate on this.
And to truly understand the full picture of Epstein, we need to go back to Robert Maxwell. The mainstream media telling of the life of Robert Maxwell says poetically that he walked. No, Robert Maxwell did not walk himself to British mandated Palestine. That is categorically false. Maxwell was exactly the kind of recruit that Britain needed. He had the languages, he had a high risk tolerance, and he had proven himself an extremely effective communicator. The British authorities like Maxwell, and so after the war they place him inside the British Control Commission for Germany. His role in public relations and information services control gave Maxwell the power to decide what could be published or read inside the British-controlled part of Germany. He would personally vet the editors, license printers, and watch for any political risk. In other words, he had total information control. By 1947, Maxwell ran a whole publisher in Germany for the British. This trained him in leadership for the British Empire's information war against the working class. He learned how the state uses publishing as its main weapon. He learned how the media is used to steer public knowledge, launder influence, and surveil enemies and allies alike. He decided what research and titles got translated from German to English. He was a gatekeeper node between German research scientists and Western commercial entities. He was the gatekeeper of the knowledge that enabled the Western commercial pipelines. For his friends, he delivered both cash and leverage. For everybody else, he delivered propaganda. Maxwell negotiated directly with government agencies, universities, and intelligence agencies. He understood that publishing is not just culture. It is power's most important weapon, what you know. And in 1988, he made his boldest move. He spent $2.5 billion on buying Macmillan Inc. Macmillan produced school books used by millions of American children. These books shaped how generations of children understood their history, their government, science, the economy. This one purchase put Maxwell overnight in control of the entire narrative ecosystem. 1988, Maxwell spent $2.6 billion to buy that power. By 1988, Macmillan textbooks already had a deep position in the US education system. By the late 1980s, Macmillan is not really a publishing house. It's more of a bundle of children's book companies rolled up by mergers. And that's what Maxwell bought. Some of the directors on that board also just did not want to be seen to be handing a cornerstone of American educational publishing into the hands of a British tycoon with a bad reputation. The Washington Post at the time marked this as the first successful hostile takeover of a domestic publishing company. He buys more education publishers. For $260 million, he buys Merrill Publishing, who produced elementary, high school, and college textbooks in science education. He buys Jossey Base, professional and academic publishers, especially in management and higher education. He buys Laidlaw, who focus on K through 12 book publishing. That expands the Macmillan footprint in core school textbook material. He buys Sieber and McIntyre, Dellin Publishing, and Penwell Books, all education-adjacent publishing. The book behind me is by McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill had been established in 1909 and initially published technical journals, but by the 1920s they had moved into educational publishing, producing textbooks for schools and colleges. Over the 20th century, McGraw-Hill became a pillar of American educational publishing. By the 1980s, it was one of the big three educational publishers in the US. Crucially, McGraw-Hill also owned CTB McGraw-Hill, who were the standardized testing company. So they weren't just selling school books, they were also selling the testing systems that measured whether those school books had been successful or not. Owning school books is powerful, but owning school books and the testing, that's leverage. In May 1989, Macmillan and McGraw-Hill announced the Macmillan and McGraw-Hill School Publishing Company. This partnership plugged the Macmillan books into the McGraw-Hill channels. Maxwell was already a controversial figure, but McGraw-Hill was seen as a prestigious, established American brand. Partnering with them gave him cover, a way to enter his materials into the US school markets without looking like a foreign raider was running it alone. You learn from their books and you're measured on their tests. They could cover more grades, more schools, more subjects, controlled what children read and how they were assessed on their skills. Controls. It's still here. He's gone. The structure stayed.
The values, the ideologies, and the version of history all was curriculum that was shaped by a foreign asset for American students because it made money. So Robert Maxwell was able to sell his worldview to every American student, and we didn't even know it. Robert Maxwell's empire was allowed to grow under the Reagan administration because of Reagan's policies of combining corporate control with public policy and basically privatizing the American curriculum, school education curriculum, underneath this corporate controlled entity. And nobody ever really seemed to know that's what was happening, especially in public schools. So ultimately taking America's education system from public good to a private product. All in all, creating a psychological loop and then called that learning. So what was happening on Epstein Island? Basically, what we do know is that girls went out there and they were traumatized by adults, men and women alike. And they were sexually assaulted, sexually abused, and basically used for some sort of rituals that they were doing on Epstein Island. And there were men, politicians, we all know and understand somehow that this was what happened there. But what was the deeper meaning behind all of this? Because if we think about Ghislaine Maxwell, we can think that she understood some aspect of what her father was doing. We've just been focused on the salacious aspects of it. And of course, wanting people to be held accountable for abusing young girls. But ultimately, how is this an extension of what they were doing already to all of American children psychologically? This potentially was Ghislaine and Epstein scaling this business, doing experiments for psychological purposes that could potentially be expanded in the United States. So the Epstein files could actually be exposing how Ghislaine and Maxwell and politicians were trying to evolve what Robert Maxwell has already been doing. Ghislaine Maxwell accused her father of both physical and psychological abuse, the kinds of abuse that was meant to break you and to put you into positions of compliance. What do you think was happening on Epstein Island? What kinds of empire can you grow from this type of behavior, from trauma? And what could politicians be learning and observing and wanting to understand in respect to educating a populace that they want more compliant? Do you see why the Epstein files might not be what they want anyone to see beyond just knowing the names and lists of who went to Epstein Island? Because even if you know those names, you don't know what they were doing there. But if there are information to say what was really happening, well, that might be something they don't want exposed. What were they teaching those children out there? And I hate to say it, but it always starts with girls. Controlling women and girls has always been the gateway to controlling society. So if you're like, well, why weren't there more boys involved? Controlling women and girls has always been the gateway to controlling society. And we see that now, and we see that in the past. We see this since biblical times, okay? Controlling women and girls has always been the gateway to controlling society for men. It's not random that they were primarily abusing young girls, because understanding how to get women and girls compliant has been one of the things that social political structures have always tried to implement in an effort to control society at large. So it's not delulu to think that Epstein Island was actually testing ground for more than just sex crimes. They have been collecting data on all of us. And our terror and our trauma and how much we resist and our response to it is data. It is all data. What are in the Epstein files is likely data on far more than the politicians and celebrities or connections within government that abuse children. It is far deeper data sets that are likely to expose underlying control of all of us and the psychological grooming that is needed to get people under control. It is likely that what was happening and what was being collected, the type of data that was being collected on Epstein Island, was more related to live experiments in grooming and compliance, and then ultimately silence and control. Human trials in the psychology of domination. And who wants to dominate more than our politicians? I feel like this is why the Epstein files are being hidden. There are so many more things in those files than finances and lists of pedophiles that went out to that island. They want to hide the truth behind what they're really doing to all Americans and potentially all the populace around the world. Because I can tell you right now, living in Italy, I've been going down this rabbit hole of how we learn and what we learn and how it shapes our ideologies. Because I can ask Italians questions, and since I post on social media, I post on TikTok some things sometimes about politics, and I don't know how many people will respond the exact same way. And it's terrifying because I don't think that they realize that they have been brainwashed to think and not think deeper than what they have already been told. So I have actually, you can see it. We can see it, like how they built the cults that they've built. We can see it. Americans are all asking the same questions about the Epstein's files. Who was on the plane? Who is on the list? Because we already think we know what they were doing. We know what they were doing. We think we know what they were doing. We know that they were abusing children, but we don't know what was deeper than that abuse. And why are there so many files if it's just a list of people who were going to an island? That's a lot of files for just who's there. And when you look at the participants and their background and understanding all of the aspects of what they could have been doing out there, those files start to look like maybe the information is more than just lists, but data sets on Americans, on abuse, on experiments on children, on understanding how we can create more of a surveillance state and get people to comply. The Epstein files are not exposing just individuals. They're exposing a lineage, or they could expose a lineage if we ever found out what was actually in them, which we probably won't. But when you look at how the information and the people involved are all connected, then you can start to understand it's more than just who was on the plane and who was on the list, because we already know that most of the people are disgusting and pedophiles. You already know that. What's the point of knowing them exactly? We keep asking the wrong questions, but somehow we're all asking the same one. But while we're asking the same question, we're ignoring all of the facts that Robert Maxwell manipulated the education system in the United States using our government and their compliance with corporate control to build public policy for decades, and what that effects has had on the grand populace in the United States. Right now, we're living in a country that was educated by Robert Maxwell, and it's full of adults who are in this system and don't know why they think what they think, and they don't know why they don't know what they don't know, because they don't know what questions to ask. Because this period of idiocracy that we are in might actually have been the goal built starting 20 years ago, so that they can have a whole generation of people just like the ones we have right now. Because between Reagan allowing this to begin and Bush, with his No Child Left Behind, we have left generations of children in the dark, manipulated, without the basic education that they need. It is purposeful when you think about the fact that most Americans can only comprehend at a 6th grade level of education, but they have managed to get all the way through high school. That's most Americans. That is not by accident. That's on purpose and by design. Because how can you be tested from 6th grade to 12th, 6 more grades beyond 6th grade? How can you have passed education that was meant to keep leveling you up? How can it not be by design if you can graduate from the 12th grade with a 6th grade reading comprehension level? When they built the books, they built the systems to test you, and it's a loop, and you're exactly where they wanted you to be. Those are just my notes, and I would love to talk to you guys in the comments and hear your perspectives, and definitely let me know what you think if you've been thinking about this, because I have been going down this rabbit hole because I really have seen how different education systems create different narratives, particularly about empire. Guys, if you have not already, please subscribe to my channel, and ciao for now.